Well, welcome back for a final go here at cosmology, theology, and many other things. Several people have told me that the recordings come through pretty well, and so I recommend it to others who can't be here, or if you want to go back and hear yourself again, you can. I'm sure you don't want to go on there just to see me, but you can do that. Okay, let's start with a scripture passage, which is all queued up down there somewhere. 1 Corinthians 13.
For tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide. These three. The greatest of these is love.
Thank you. I think there are words of wisdom there. We move forward from this experience that we go from seeing dimly to trusting someday that we will see more clearly. That's an evolving process, and it's part of what we've been talking about. And I'm struck by how insightful the Apostle Paul was in terms of anticipating kind of where we've come as a human race. That's not science, that's poetry and prophecy and so forth, but an interesting mission. I on a handout here, I put together some things that some of you told me about, wrote down, sent in, whatever. I hope I adequately captured. I crunched some things together for the short sake of brevity, and you can clarify that too. So those things are on the table, and a couple of those actually are mine. The last two, which I think I touched on a little bit last week, but I can expand if we want, if we get to those. But I wanted to have a lot of conversation today and see what else you might want to get on the agenda. I talked to Mary Bennis out there over coffee. She's got a busy life and couldn't stay, but she said, push everybody hard. I really want to know what everybody is thinking and got out of this experience. So it's not me, then it's Mary. Here's what I'd like to do though to start out. And sorry for the folks who might be online because you're not going to hear all this for the next 3 minutes, but bear with us. I'd like to pair up, or maybe if it's a threesome is easier than a twosome or whatever. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. That'd be a minute and a half for each person in a pair. Maybe you don't even need that long, but share either something, a new insight that you've gotten out of this experience, and or a question that you still have or that's developed. So an insight or a question. And then we'll just toss some of those out and I'll write them on the board, and that'll kind of guide us where we can go in the conversation. Fair enough? Okay, I'm going to set a timer. Go, 3 minutes. I hear lots of conversation, so we've got some ideas. Push forward here. For those, anybody who may have joined us online, we're just taking a minute to share some thoughts so we can get them out, in front of all of us. Anybody?
Well,
What do you think? What would you like to get in front of us to push a little farther on?
They do.
Yes, Bill.
Well, one, I thought, just when Kate was reading that passage from Paul, is there is a certain legitimacy to not expecting children to be able to handle
Yes.
concepts of adulthood. And so we're in the church confirmation instruction, Sunday school, adult class. How do we make that allowance and how do we weave into
Okay,
a more mature understanding?
great. Maybe that's next week's children's message time. Well, that's good. Well, let's talk about that. What else? Yes, Kate.
With that, I want to piggyback on that. I think it also shows you how much there's a lot of adults who think they've gotten through confirmation and they now know everything and they don't need to do adult Sunday school. And I think this is a really good example of no, you got some base here. Now it's time for you to actually wrestle with all the rest for those people who don't like to do adult Sunday school.
Okay.
I have many of those in my life.
Uh,
So that's why I think this is where I can say, no, how do you pair this together and this with grounding?
So just push that out a little bit more if you can, when you say it. What's the thing you've gotten out of this class that you think could really benefit adult learning?
Well, one basic thing is that whole look of the books.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And so many people I know will say, God made the heavens and the earth in 7 days. And those 7 days are 24 hours. Our 7 days. And I'm like, no. And so now, you know, having watched you with all those books and how it all works and Big Bang and all of that, I can visually say, no. And here's a way to visually show it to you.
Yeah.
You know, things like that, that the timing that is in our mind and in our world is not the same timing as God's will. God's timing.
And if you're like me and I want to say, I don't really talk to anybody who thinks that way. That just shows the smallness of my world. There are a lot of folks.
Yeah.
But I would say even for those, I think John brought this up earlier on too, even if you say, well, but okay, I can deal with 13 billion years. That's just how God got everything to be just exactly the way God wants it. We're still talking more about an architect than a gardener, maybe, and how is God, you know, working with all the various aspects of God's wisdom. Okay, yeah, but all right, that's good. What else? Yes.
Well, for me, the thing that's become alive even more is just the whole idea of wonder
Yes.
and human limitations and how much there is and how, you know, less is unknowable now than before, but are we ever gonna?
Yes.
There's so much that's still unknown.
Can we add mystery to this?
Yeah, wonder, mystery, yeah, that's.
Maybe what is that? But
And I also liked imagination. You know,
okay.
to pull us out, imagination. God has an imagination.
I'm gonna paraphrase that as read.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is about 30 years ago, some feminist theologians got together and had a conference that they called the Reimagining Conference. Remember this? My wife attended that. That was, I think, just before we left San Diego. She landed here in Columbus and Cider Valley Presbyterian. One of the first things people wanted to know was, what are you doing with this reimagining thing? And the point was simply not to be heretical, although there were some feminist theologians who really pushed the envelope there, but simply to say we have to, and I think this actually captures a lot of what I've been trying to do here. We have to rethink some basic ways that we've thought. Unless you want to be a total science denier, you know, and that's been one of the themes I've tried to develop here is that you know, it's not about how to force fit science into your theology. It's about how to keep reimagining your theology. So as we increase in wisdom and stature and the knowledge of God and the cosmos, paraphrase the Bible, then we have a more mature faith that really works very well. What else? Yes, please.
Well, just to move on with what you were saying, Bruce and I were in the same confirmation class back in 1947. The pastor's name
Which
was
volume of the books
Bill.
would that have?
Yeah.
Like three.
Was Bill Narrance. And we're sitting here saying how far we have come from the catechism class. And in those days, we went for 2 years, once a week.
Yeah.
On a Wednesday after school or something.
Right.
And Saturday.
What, I'm curious, what would you say has allowed you to come as far as you've come and not stay just simply with what you learned in 1947?
Well, it took a long time until I was probably in my 40s. And
What happened?
not worried. Well, I met a friend who was going to a progressive church. And she introduced me to Robinson.
Oh,
And that's when it
To Gene
began.
Robbins?
That's, yeah.
to John H.
The
J.
bishop,
Robinson.
the
Bishop, yeah.
bishop of the
Yeah.
Episcopal.
Yeah.
And that's when I began to rethink I probably hadn't thought much about it up until that time. And it was like my epiphany.
yeah.
I moved on from there and read many things.
So, and I'm sorry, I should be repeating some of this just for those of you who are out there, but we're just talking here about what we might have learned Sunday school catechism wise, and what are the turning points that might have gotten our thinking moving, asking questions to a different spot. But go ahead.
Oh, well,
Whichever one of you, I don't.
well, the other thing that I would say is that I'm really interested in history. From the century 1, 2, and 3, I would love a history course in the church, what was happening and how it happened and how it developed.
Well, it wasn't on the internet, that's what I can say. Yes. Go ahead.
Well, I decided at the age of 12 after catechism. And this Bill Narrance was really somebody that he was young. He was what they called a vicar at the church at the time. And I wanted him to confirm me because there was a very elderly pastor, no disrespect in my comments, but this is the thinking of a 12-year-old. And so I wanted to be confirmed by Bill Narrance, and I wasn't sure he'd be there because it was a short-term, internship. So I was at a big Lutheran church here in Columbus, and one Sunday morning when the senior pastor was speaking and saying, "I, by the power invested in you, forgive you all your sins." And I decided at the age of 12, I wasn't doing too much sinning, and I didn't know what he meant. But I started to do my own thinking.
I thought you were gonna say you started to do your own sin.
Well, sin in the case was a little bit different than right now. And I go to lots of different churches and denominations, and I am a thinker. And coincidentally, at Kensington, Don Locke has started a series. It's partially video, and I think it's called The Great something. I don't remember the next word, but there's a gentleman from Colgate University that's focusing on archaeology and anthropology. And when the series started video, Don Locke started at 4, which was the culture of Mesopotamia and the development of people. Well, Saturday when I was there, I had trouble getting the video going. And so it started at the Paleolithic, which he had decided not to go to because it was really not the development of human beings. But he did the timeline very similar to what you did on the millions of years and human thought and that sort of thing. But having seen the Paleolithic video after Mesopotamia, it was rather interesting to go back and see where they were before they got to Mesopotamia.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Um,
I just, I think because I went to Sunday school earlier this morning, it was on Mary, the mother of Jesus. Well, there's a lot that's been written. Just because it's written by somebody centuries ago doesn't mean we have to believe it. We can read it, we can listen to it, and we can learn from it, but it doesn't mean we have to.
Yeah.
I'm a very free thinker.
And you said it all, I don't need to try and understand, that's great. I'm gonna add, well, you got me thinking, this, we talked about this a little bit, but it's worth just mentioning again, the concept of a second naivete, where you have your uncritical childlike Sunday school confirmation faith. You come to a point in life where you start asking questions about that, which is interesting to me, but when does that happen for us? When do we develop a more critical faith? So we get some distance from it all. And then is it possible, as some would say, theologians, Paul McClure, a philosopher, came up with this idea, that you come back to the ideas with a second sort of naivete, not your first naivete where you swallowed anything and didn't ask questions, but now with your questions in focus, you come back and say, where is the truth in all this that may not be as literal as I once thought, but still true? Something like what Dave was doing in the sermon this morning. I think it's, we reimagine, we rethink what the satanic presence is, and then I appropriate it in a new way. I don't say, well, that's just a silly story. It doesn't have anything to do with me. It's got everything to do with me, but not in the way that I once thought, because I was lazy, not because I didn't really think about it. Now that I've thought about it, I think so that's part of the mystery of the one. Okay, anything else? We're going to move into some discussion here. Anything else we want to make sure we touch on?
Thinking is hard work.
Okay.
Thinking is hard work. And brain energy.
Right.
And it takes a lot of energy.
That's why Dave was ignoring those stories for all that time.
Well, I would almost disagree and say thinking's only hard work if you expect to get answers.
Yeah.
It's really fun to just think and then just, okay, you know what I mean?
I do. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. And the quantum truth now, I mean, Mark's gonna be leading this group here in a few weeks, so. It just seems if any other ideas would get on the board that.
Well, we're ever evolving.
Okay, well, then let's just put evolution and whatnot up here. Still evolving. Okay, yes.
There's these ideas that are being.
Shout it out if you can, but I'll try to repeat it.
Hi, hello. There's these ideas that are kind of percolating and I'm hearing. And I was thinking, about, the first modern and deconstruction,
Yes.
right? And so with deconstruction, it's, there's this idea of, like, you have systems and ways of thinking, and you start questioning your system. But when you do that, you're also trying to like find the nuggets, like find the baby that's inside the bathwater.
If you're doing the kind of thinking that John was talking about, where you're really looking for something, otherwise you can just deconstruct and say, hey, this is fun, right? Throwing out the water. Am I following you?
I think that is a critique of deconstruction. That doesn't take deconstruction seriously.
Oh, okay.
But with that questioning, you are trying to find nuggets. And then that leads to your reimagination.
Yes. Okay.
Right? Which can also, it is a process that is hard, I think, and it should demand a reconstruction with those tools.
Yes, that's what I was trying to do. Right. I think if You can't get to a second naivete, you can't get to a reimagined theology without a certain amount, without a lot of deconstructing. So you see, what's really the building blocks here that I can now use to get something that I can really, with adult eyes and adult experience, embrace more fully. So I don't want to deconstruction, only to say it's one part of a larger process.
It is a
Where we go, yeah, okay. All right, well, let's just have some conversation about what some of these things, or is there anything on this list? Let's go to the list first, so folks set that in. Anything there that you'd like to jump on? Or do you have a final answer to?
Bill does.
Yes, oh, sorry.
Maybe your last point, what does the incarnation have to do with all this? Because I think I have come to the belief now that Jesus was a man and only a man. His deification occurred within the church and his followers.
Okay.
But that means that then the one we call the second person of the Trinity and whom we worship was merely a man.
Okay. The ancient church would call him a heretic for thinking thusly. But no good theology ever developed without somebody pushing in that way. So blessings on that.
Not only the ancient church, I think.
Well,
I've told him, you can't preach that.
so
Oh my gosh,
yeah, go ahead.
I have to comment on that, what you said, that Jesus was just a man, that the incarnation doesn't, that is, it didn't happen, that Jesus was just a man. See, I think that too. And I mean, hearing you say that, it just, wow, somebody else thinks that too. He was a Jewish man.
Yes.
But and at that, it was man. What about the other half of humanity, right?
Well, I'm sorry, he was just a man.
Right.
He has a feminine side.
Yeah, okay, well, but that's an issue that's also been pushed by some theologians that can we embrace God in human form if that human form is a male form, and therefore, all of the issues of now, you also say though, Jesus was probably a person of color. And they say there aren't that many blonde, blue-eyed people in the Middle East. And so that's a shock to some people's thinking. It's probably a good thing actually that we don't have photographic images of Jesus. And maybe that, well, whatever the case might be. But yeah, go ahead.
And probably a good thing too, that we can't access pieces of the true cross, which are really true cross, and analyze his DNA, because then we would find out who his father was.
Right. Well, we got a lot of things on the table here today, race the issue of birth and so forth. But anybody else want to climb into this? I don't. I'm pretty sure.
Well, I was at Christ Lutheran Church and they had a series of women of the Bible.
Oh yeah. Oh.
And I went to the first, not the others. I never can be there. But this morning they were talking about Mary, the mother of Jesus. And the person who gave the presentation was a professor of math in the music department. But he basically went through the history when the church and the church fathers made these decrees and talking about the Christian church, but that's basically what happens. And the role of Mary and the personhood and the deity and Joseph, whether he was, one of the things was Jesus and brother were Joseph's children, but all different kinds of things about Mary. But the decrees of the Catholic Church up until the time of Martin Luther then allowed us to be free thinking and rebellion. Teachings of the church. He started us.
There were other rebellious types too. They weren't as famous, but
Got burned at the stake.
yeah, exactly. Well, let me just throw out a thought about incarnation here. I put this quote on the handout from James Nelson. It's a book I used when I taught a course on addiction and so forth. That James Nelson was a theologian, pastor who had discovered in his 40s that he was an alcoholic. He started to drink more heavily and went through a period of recovery and so forth. But he came to ask himself this question: that what if control, because that's such a large part of alcoholic life, what if control is not really the way that even God plays God? Because the alcoholic would say, you know, it's often about trying to play God. You think you can control everything. Well, somewhere in there, I think, is an insight about what the incarnation may be all about. That we talked about this a little bit in terms of how we conceive of power. What is power? And try to define that as power is simply the ability to do something of consequence, to have something of consequence happen. And so we often think about power in terms of coercive power. You know, I can make you work for me. I can force you to serve in my army. I can make you pay me tribute. I can threaten you with hell, and therefore keep you coming to church or confession or something. And what the early church tried to lift up, I think, was the power of God. If we take the Jesus thing seriously, is to say that there is true transformational power in self-giving love, in suffering love, and that this Jesus person. So in the Nicene Creed, when we talk about God from God, light from light, true God from true God, they were struggling to find language that could just sit on the razor's edge here and work it both ways. That Jesus is simultaneously fully human and fully divine. And then the churches, all kinds of people argue either side of it. No, fully divine just looks human. No, fully human and maybe later became sort of divine or something. But the one that works for me is light from light. And their image was if you take a lit candle and stick another candle, like we do on Christmas Eve and so forth, light from light, right? So which is the original flame once you've got two of them? I mean, how do you, they are separate, but somehow connected. One, I don't know.
It's like infection.
Infection.
It's like infection of contagion.
There you go. One of that. That's interesting. Well, at any rate, it's always been a struggle to say, how can this be full humanity and full divinity? And the issue would be, if not human, how can we say God understands our experience? If not divine, how can we say that there's any salvific power in what Jesus is doing to transform not just us, but the cosmos? Yeah, John.
So you use the language fully human, fully divine, but I've also heard the expression over the last few years, and I don't really get it always, usually, truly human.
Yeah, okay.
So that seems to me to have a different connotation, though, that in some way being truly human, the fullest expression of humanity is sort of different than being, I think of fully as being all human, all divine, or is it some mix? And what's the percentage? You know, which doesn't make any sense to me. But what does it mean when people refer to truly human,
right,
or the fullest expression of humanity?
So John has just helpfully corrected me, and we can now change places. So is it more helpful to talk about truly human than fully human? So one avenue into that, when the Bible uses the phrase "Son of Man," I grew up thinking that meant, that's talking about Jesus' humanity. No, wrong, and sorry. Son of Man is an Old Testament term, actually from the book of Daniel and so forth. It simply refers to the true and authentic human. And some, I think in the Message and so forth, that kind of language is used. But so Jesus comes as the true representative of well, I would still say the fullness of humanity. In some ways, we are less than, we say sometimes, well, I'm only human. No, the problem is you're not really as much of humanity as God thought it could be.
Okay,
That's the
okay.
problem. And so people looked at Jesus and said, you know, that's the real deal. That looks like what human beings really are all about. But I no good one. I think true is a good way to say it. Well, in the old language of the Nicene Creed, it's very God from very God, the very meaning true, verily, verily true. So true and true, I don't know what the Latin or Greek was on that, but not bad. Which then says there's something about humanity as we have evolved and are not, we're still on the way toward becoming truly human. We're not really there. And I don't, so one of the insights in all this for me is not to go back and think about that we were once true and it fell from that. No, we are moving toward the fullness of humanity. And we rise and fall along the ways and roller coaster.
We're becoming.
Yeah, right. So yeah, we're human becomings more than human beings, sort of static state, you know. Yeah, we're still sort of becoming. So especially in Lent, I would not want to lose sight of the suffering of Jesus and Jesus' association with those in everything in creation that suffers. And that's on to another, the first question about what's the deal with suffering? And we always have to ask that. And I wanted to recommend again, John Polkinghorne, who I mentioned is the person who taught physics at Cambridge, then became an Anglican priest, went back to teach at Cambridge. In this little book on Serious Talk, he addresses suffering by saying that he sees three ways you can deal with that. You can deal with it with the free will concept, which is, well, you got free will, you make bad decisions, stuff happens, you suffer. That makes a certain amount of sense. However, it does not explain volcanoes that may erupt and come down and run all over Pompeii and kill everybody. So that argument can then be introduced as what's called free process. God puts in motion a creation that, you know, tectonic plates are going to do what tectonic plates do, and there you go.
I've never heard that term free process.
Yeah, well, that's his term.
Okay.
Free will, free process.
I think of it,
Whatever you want to call
is chaos inappropriate?
it.
Because it feels
Well,
like
that's
there's
a-
chaos out in the
Well, that's
world.
chaos becomes a different technical term in physics, but it could work.
Oh,
But it's the idea that if you create, it makes some sense. You create a world like this that gives the possibility of life emerging. You're going to have volcanoes and earthquakes and tornadoes and all kinds. That's all necessary to some moving forward. So there's that argument. But there's a third way to look at it, which is simply to say this is basically an unanswerable question. However, what Christians are anchoring their faith in is God shares in all of that suffering. And the incarnation is the pathway into seeing what that's all about. Not just human suffering, but every ant that I stupidly smash on the sidewalk because I don't like to see it is somehow taken up in the reality of God. I had this happen the other day. I was out on the back porch. There was a bug caught on the screen, and I as a child I would have just smashed that, you know. But I thought I'm not gonna. One more respect. I wanted to just flick it away, but when I flicked it away, I actually accidentally smashed it, and part of it was squiggling, and the other it was dead. I out of mercy, I just squashed the whole thing. You know, but somehow even that moment is taken up, I would say, in the mind of God. And that's part of what redemption is about. Nothing is eternally lost in that sense. And that may have a way of answering. So when entropy finally has its last say and the sun flames out and the earth is no more, physically, where does all that still exist? That's in the mind of God, which is a metaphor. Yes, Melanie.
Sorry,
Go
I
for it.
was trying to pull the thought together.
Oh, okay.
I think there might, this would be a good place to, we could like examine the idea of suffering, right? So like, are we doing some categorical inflation here too? like, there's suffering that we experience because capitalism, for instance, or patriarchy, or straightness, or racism,
Yep.
and I just like all the same things, multiple different ways. Or the experience that Jesus had in the incarnation, like he didn't like sometimes when we say he associated with those who are suffering, that takes away from the fact that he was a Jewish man who was born in a village, was 2,000 crosses around his village when he was a child. Like he was suffering. And then that's a different category. That's a category of suffering. Then there's pain.
Right.
And pain is different. Just like when we say a person, I had pain because I was growing and my bones hurt. Being painful because it hurts to grow. And something like tectonic plates are good because it's part of the process of living and growing and it is painful. But I don't know if that's necessarily something.
Okay, I appreciate what you're saying, and, you know, I lived in this, probably a lot of inflation. I mean, we look at, so when,
I was in
when,
I was just.
well, no, we gotta keep a big picture and focus as much as we can. So when an earthquake happens and people get washed away in the lava, who sinned on that one? Well, ancient people would have thought somebody must have screwed up or this wouldn't have happened, but Jesus says of the man born blind, that's coming up as a text here, I think, down the line. Nobody sinned here, right? This is just an opportunity to think more deeply. So, but that, I think, I would say that's real suffering if your life gets wiped out because of a volcano. That's not giving you a chance to flourish, in creation. So there's a wide spectrum of what we mean, but the church's understanding of the incarnation has always tried to reach towards saying, God is with people in that. A real simple little image of that is Robert Capon said, you go down a highway in a snowstorm and get zooped off into the ditch. Let's understand God not as the one who has the divine tow truck to come drag you out of it. God is more the weary traveler who comes along and says, I'll sit with you in this until help comes. I'll partner with you. That's its own kind of saving grace. And then it's back to, well, what do we mean by power? Is it the vending machine tow truck God, or is it the compassionate God of shared experience of shared suffering?
I like that image, but it struck me initially as like, or is God the one who caused the car to go off and with him? And then knowing that you would experience all that you experienced, that was his plan.
Right. So,
which I don't believe that. Like that was my first thought. I really like the weary traveler who sits with you, not the tow truck guy, and not the crazy driver who maybe ran you off the road or anything.
Okay. Well, all metaphors and analogies have their limits. We just found what those are. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna go back a couple of
Yeah, good,
weeks
yeah.
when we were talking about the asked for what's up the
Oh,
dinosaurs. And, my contrary image is God watching that and saying, damn, it's about time that megafauna was getting nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's go on with something else then.
Let's kind of back it up and we start reimagining with these little amendments.
Yeah, and if you and one of my first reports, just a gut level reaction off the top of my head. That's a great mix thing. This guy was a physicist. Dinosaurs are an interesting example, where if you think of God as the divine architect, that is getting, got us, that we are the finished product. And so God had to get everything to be where we are, and we're the pinnacle. And to say, well, why mess around with the dinosaurs for a couple 100 million years or so? I mean, it's just kind of a nuisance. But you say, no, I was working with the cosmos, and certain things happen such that dinosaurs can now do. Oh, that's interesting. And now certain other things happen, contingencies, true novelty happens, asteroid, whatever. And now God is saying, okay, let's see where we go with this now. Keep working. And now this, but that leads to the question that somebody raised here about what's after Homo sapiens? Can we entertain that question? Does this help move us off center thinking? I mean, and it's very biblical, what are we that you are mindful of us? We're just going to go and I think you raised this, so go ahead.
Yeah, something I read somewhere, I don't remember where, but it just strikes me as very true that from the perspective of the dinosaurs, we all live in a post-apocalyptic world.
Yeah, right.
And we're the dinosaurs, conscious and intelligent as we are. Could they have imagined that in this post-apocalyptic world that the descendants of those little rats running around were going to rise to where we are? And then further, taking that further, I just wonder, why would we assume we're the pinnacle? How do we know we're the top?
As the Bible says.
Oh, all right, sorry.
Well, back to what they were saying, I mean, that's a shortcut to calming my anxious mind and not having to think deeply about what it is I need. I believe that, but that's a facile answer to that question. And I think we may not think about this very much or often enough, but we do need to think about it. If we take the 13.8 billion years of evolution seriously, looks like there's a lot more time for things to go forward.
And also that ties into the question about extraterrestrial life.
Oh, yeah, okay. Comment on that?
How life could have developed in so many other ways, in so many other places, and some of which might have achieved sentient, conscious, intelligent life.
Yeah.
Yeah, we watched a program on Nova, I guess it was, that, talking about all with the Webb telescope, they can now see.
Yes.
And all these other worlds out there, surely there's some kind of sentient life on them.
Two things. It's interesting. Brief tangent. You mentioned the Webb telescope when I mentioned it. I don't know if you saw in the news this week that the Webb telescope has revealed within the past 6 months or so that we've got at least a small handful of galaxies out there that, again, with the red shifting imagery, so you know how far away those are, how much time it's taken for that red light and then when it's expected to come. These discovered galaxies that are very fully formed, but date back to maybe within 500 million years of what we think of as the big movement forward. Okay, so we thought it took a lot of time for all of that matter out there to coalesce into a galaxy, and now it looks like we've got galaxies as fully formed as what we now see as the Milky Way that were there early on. That has been just astrophysical people are saying, well, they're not saying, oh my God, I was just thinking about it. My hunch is what that my hunch is it's going to mean that there's going to be some discoveries that lead to the universe back farther than 13.8 billion years. But maybe not. Maybe they're just things we didn't know about how galaxies come to be. That's an interesting new piece of data. Okay, but that's not what we were talking about. Oh, extraterrestrial. Think about that term. So terrestrial comes from terra, terra firma, that's the earth. We are the extraterrestrials for somebody out there, right? I mean, so what can that mean? Have you ever watched back in the day, Al's?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I love Al, because, we come to the planet Melmac and whatever. It's an interesting spin on making you think about, who's what. My own thought is that almost certainly there is organic life elsewhere. It just seems so highly improbable that that's not the case, given what we know about the basic molecular structure of the universe. We've got the original building blocks of hydrogen and helium, eventually becoming oxygen, eventually forming into carbon, eventually able to become molecular structure. It's just pretty unthinkable. Now, but who knows in a given situation what the novelty possibilities, the variances, the contingencies are that lead to this, that, or the other, and if Darwin was on anything useful with evolution, natural selection plays a part. Lots of dead ends could be out there in the cosmos, didn't come to anything. Others may have. And now we're really at the level of speculation where we can't know.
Even that NOVA program that Ruth referred to didn't even touch on the fact, well, there's believed to be the fact that there is more dark energy out there
Yes,
than there is the energy we can analyze.
right. This so-called dark matter.
Yeah. Black holes.
Yeah. Well, before we got to wrap up here in a minute. I want to make sure we touch on this though. Which is one of I was on here somewhere about how, if at all, has your understanding of God developed, changed, shifted, bring new questions? Just the basic God question. Anybody, where are you with that at this point?
Confused.
Because
It makes me think hard.
no apologies for that.
No, I know when I was younger, a very simple explanation of God satisfied me.
Yeah.
But that's not true now, So what should I believe? What do I believe?
Yeah.
You're gonna tell me what I should believe and what I do believe?
Go for it.
This course and all this other too, I feel more humble and aware of how little I know.
Yeah, that's good on.
With some of the thoughts around the all or omni, God being, omnipresent, omniscience, God being all this, when looking at wonder, mystery, and reimagining, does God wonder? Does God experience mystery? Does God reimagine? In your comment about the dinosaurs and God's response to that. Yeah, I got just the whole question of a God who and process theology kind of a God who develops, the God who is not fixed and immovable and all everything.
God is changed.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't have to spend someone thinking about this out in my life and says, that's a mystery there. Yeah, but a God who is not a fixed, steady state, but is rolling and taking in and moving with and also becoming. There's some dangerous ways that can go too, because you get running away with some speculations, but the idea of fixed permanence has its own problems that gets us really trapped. But yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I like Naomi's comment.
Oh.
God has changed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's throughout the universe, the creation of the visible universe is constantly changing, growing apart, coming back together. But it's an extremely violent process. we as creatures, once life began, from the very beginning. Life has been very extreme. We got all sorts of organisms living off of other organisms. We got them.
The only way, but the way that I can make some sense out of that is this concept of leaving the spread toward a large enough God. The God who's a large enough God that really is cosmic. And then to say that, nothing is ever eternally lost for God. So that in whatever violent and suffering and self-created misery and whatever, none of that does God set aside and say, well, that doesn't really matter. No, God somehow takes all that in. And it is not lost, but is redeemable, in some fashion. Okay, let's make this the last thing because I don't want to disappoint Michelle out there, who asked the question about heaven. And she assured me it's not that she doesn't believe in heaven, but it's this. I wonder how should we think about whatever is after this earthly life? And one way to focus that is to say death is real, but not necessarily final. And make a distinction. So to get away from those Platonic ideas that Plato had, that when you die, some part of you called your soul doesn't go through death; it just escapes to the hereafter. That's the analogical way of reading the cosmos that we talk about. That is not a truly traditional Christian way of looking at humanity and death and life for the ever after, although it's commonly held by many people. Like your body is just the shell that you have, and we'll get rid of that, but your soul will flee to heaven. It leaves us though with the question of what is a helpful, healthy, useful way to think about whatever happens after death.
Different religions have thoughts about the afterlife. And there's a concept of reincarnation. But knowing a little bit about Einstein, I really put some thought that it's a transfer of energy. That could be called the soul, but we do have energy. And life is a miracle and a mystery. They both have 7 letters and they start with M. Life is a mystery. And it's just accepting whatever is and whatever happens. We have no control. But there's some kind of a force that makes us who we are and makes us do what we do. And for me, I don't have to have an explanation. I accept it and enjoy it and make the most of it every day. Because this could be my last. And I'm going to make the most of it. So what happens after that? Nobody's ever come back and said.
So in terms of second naivete and that sort of thing, it does strike me that if for centuries people have suffered under some of the teachings of the church that want to make you feel very anxious about your life, because if you're not good enough, you're going to suffer eternally. And so that having been put on many people raises question. I think it's a matter of getting some critical distance from that, coming back to another place to say, I'm not going to buy into that way of thinking. And so I can be more at peace with, I would say for myself, whatever happens, I'm trusting God is going to make that right. If I get eternal punishment, then I deserved it, and whatever. I don't actually think that probably would happen, but do I trust a big enough God to do justice with all of this? And one way of looking at it.
Before we leave, I
Yes,
want to make sure I tell you, I really appreciated your list of books.
Oh, okay.
up there.
All right.
And to give some concrete example of where we are, where we.
Okay.
It's very effective.
Yeah.
Very,
well,
very
Okay. Well, our time is really past. Time is real and moves in us. Our reminded. which is one of the differences between Christianity and some other religions, like those that have the incarnational aspect. Time is a wheel that keeps coming back. The Christian way of thinking about that is that time is an arrow going ever forward, and becoming something at the end. So let me just end with that. One of the reasons I got really interested in all this was I was teaching this course in the fall, and our theological theme was on hope. And so just a word about hope as we wrap up that Paul says in Romans, hope that is seen is not hope. He hopes for what is seen. So I think it was John Plot, author I've been using, who says hope by definition raises expectations beyond the situation at hand. Right? You see what you got right here, but hope by definition means you can reach, grasp, imagine, hope for something more than that. And who hopes for what they see? Right? You hope for something that's more than that. And hope in the Christian faith is based on promise. That we place our hope in the fact that incarnationally God has made promises about what true life is really all about. And so we hope for that to materialize and come, to pass. And so time as a real thing, that's the place in which expectations grow and swell and reach and expand and so forth. And we thank Einstein for that even though he didn't want to admit it at first and denied his own geometry, he eventually came around and said, no, that time is a real thing that has an art going somewhere. And Einstein's geometry helped us see that things are unfinished. I mean, some initial movement, whatever you want to call that thing, which means if you got the 30 volumes and we're not the end, you've got more volumes, that gives you a lot of room to hope for a lot of things. And that despite war in Ukraine, despite uncivil politics, despite the injustices of discrimination and hatred and so forth, that things can come to a more true, what Don Locke calls rightness, a truly reconciled state for the cosmos. And that's possible because God is making good on the promise that vulnerable, suffering love is at the center of everything. And if power is about the ability to bring past significant change, suffering love seems to be at the center of how real change happens. People put their lives and their commitments on the line for things. People are willing to come alongside of those less fortunate. And so what I use John Pott again, he says the seeds of God's future are sown in the fields of the fortuneless. If you want to know what God is really up to, you look to the margins and see how hope is taking hold there. That may be the best glimpse into what God is really all about. And that's really looking at things through the lens of the cross. That's where we're going. Okay, we're out of time. In our weeks, and is it next week? We get to, all right, so
You want to say a word about what you are doing next week? First, thank you, Brad.
Starting next week, we're going to start talking about the very non-controversial topic of abortion and through a Christian ethic lens. This is helping me to fill a final project for my Christian ethics class. So I will be noting just kind of how our conversation goes and things like that, but I won't be putting emotions with that, so I can do a creative but we'll be working our way through the February-March issue of the Journal of Lutheran Ethics, which is titled Ill/Legal Abortion, What Does That Mean to Our Christian Ethics?
Will there be copies of that available?
Yes, yeah, so we can email out the first article.
Sure.
I'm gonna be working on planning that this week and email out so people can take a look at it in advance, and we'll also read some of that together.
So will you have printed about handouts?
We will, yeah, I'll make sure that when we're here next time, that will happen.
Great, so when Karen's talking with her friends about 7-day creation, look about this course, ready to talk about.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Reproductive rights. I applaud you in advance.
Yeah, well, no,
And also,
starting off, well,
right, and for the laboratory, that this kind of an experience could be to bring classroom into the context and take the context back into the class, that's just what belongs to is about.
yeah, yeah, so bring your thoughts, bring your opinions, all thoughts and opinions are welcome, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Okay.
Great. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.